to come in. So thank you everyone for joining this morning. Today we are going to be unpacking the very interesting discussion on using AI to turn insights into impact, looking at the topic of nature and climate. My name is Amy Lehoczky. I'm the Director of Environmental, Social and Governance here within the G42 corporate family. Today I'm joined here with Dr. Wael from M42. Dr. Wael, do you want to introduce yourself?
Good morning. My name is Wael. I'm the Medical Director for Environmental Sciences at M42.
Thank you so much. Over to Dr. Vian from Habitat Alpha.
Hi everyone, I'm Dr. Vian Sharif and I'm the founder of Nature Alpha, a AI-centric natural world risk platform.
Thank you so much. And last but definitely not least is Zain from Hub 71.
Hi everyone, I'm Zain Tarawneh and I lead the climate tech vertical at Hub 71, which is Abu Dhabi's global tech ecosystem. We source the best-in-class founders and startups and help them launchpad and soft land from Abu Dhabi. It's great to have you all here.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure for you guys to come down. The last day of GITEX, what an amazing week. So thank you for all joining us. Today we're going to be unpacking three key topics. First and foremost, once we're using AI to identify stresses, risks and opportunities in our natural systems. So using AI to identify anomalies in our food systems, in our oceans, in our water. How can we use that to make informed decisions? Secondly, looking at the link between nature and finance. So how can we make this information be in a format where the CFOs of the world, the investors of the world, can make more informed decisions? Finally, looking at pilot to product. So within the Hub 71 environment, looking at new startups in the climate and nature space, and how to find the balance with managing our carbon footprint. So my first question for you, Dr. Wael, is looking at the link between human health and environmental health. So within M42, for example, that is a very important part of the work you do there and the studies you do in the Environmental Sciences Division. So the United Nations report that 13 million people die of climate-related illnesses each year. So, Dr. Wael, what type of problems are you working on at the moment, and how are you using AI and environmental genomics, for example, to formulate more information so that decision makers of the world can make more informed decisions?
So thank you very much, Amy. It's probably been one of the main targets of humanity is to conquer the environment in one form or other. Whether after the Ice Age, whether later on trying to establish farming, the Iron Age, and elsewhere. So following that. So we're just a continuum of that in our attempts to further understand what happens in the environment and how to better, very selfishly as human beings, as we've always been, to utilize that and leverage it for the benefit of humanity. And when we talk about the environment, us as a species, humans, we're just one species amongst many others. Yet the effects that we're having on the environment and it having it back on us is interrelated and it comes back. So what we're trying to do is actually ignore the human for a bit and look at everything around us, the food we eat, the air we breathe, the water we drink, and the effects of that coming back to us and how we affect it within M42. We were very lucky in that G42 as a company started in a way serendipitously at the time of COVID, whereby there was realization of the intricate relationship between us and the environment, whether that's the animals, the bats, people thought initially it could have been something else. And it was decided to invest heavily in further understanding how we can monitor a lot of these things, utilizing testing and testing mechanisms, generating a lot of data. And again, at the same time, supercomputers were coming and we had access to them which enabled and facilitated our ability to further understand and accelerate our understanding and relationship, the very complex relationships. I think the previous speaker, Javier, was speaking about methylation and how it affects. We're also including our data sets from the environment into this very complex data set of genomics to try and further leverage these tools that are available to us now to give humans a better chance to survive in this very difficult earth we're in.
Thank you so much, Dr. Wael. So now we're really understanding, the importance of AI to understand natural systems and natural capital. Now we need to translate this understanding into financial terms. So we know that the World Economic Forum reports that 44 trillion US dollars of GDP is reliant on healthy ecosystems. So if nature decline, so does profit. So Dr. Vian, the work that you're doing in Habitat Alpha, Nature Alpha, can you please tell us what your solution involves? How do you really create a solution whereby you can translate natural systems into financial terms so that investors and CEOs can make more informed decisions?
Yeah, thank you, Amy. What's interesting is that the stat from the World Economic Forum that you quite rightly quote is actually that $44 trillion worth of our economy is moderately or highly dependent on nature, which means that all the rest is also dependent on nature. And if you think about it, $120 trillion worth of capital is dependent on the natural world, because if we didn't have water to power certain businesses, energy derived from ecosystem services, we take for granted that the forests and the oceans of this world will regulate our climate. Without those things, not only would we not be able to be around, but certainly our businesses wouldn't be able to be powered either. And if you look at the Sustainable Development Goals, we've all forgotten about them really, but we've only got 5 years to achieve them. About 80% of the SDGs are underpinned by nature. And that makes sense if you think about it. So if that's the case, then logically what started to happen a few years back was that governments started to say, nature seems to be quite a critical part of our infrastructure, and therefore, who are we going to put pressure on to understand how we start to change that? How do we start to do more that is less harmful and more that is going to be protected of these services that we all need to be able to live and function in our businesses? And so the beautiful thing about where we are today and what AI has enabled us to do, and we could never have done this before today, and that's the most exciting thing for us, is that we're able to start to commingle some of the most advanced models of our world, not just how natural systems interact today, but how we can predict how natural systems will interact over time. And we can mingle that with where companies are operating, what they're doing in those locations, where their supply chains are functioning, and we can start to see where the breakdown in those natural ecosystem services is going to happen, and where those businesses are impacting the natural world to continue accelerating the decline, or where they could act to mitigate those declines. And that's what's so interesting about what we're able to do today, is not only say this is what's happening in terms of impact and dependency on these systems, but company X in this location or these multiple locations, we can see that you're not going to have enough water to be able to operate. You're not going to have the soil quality you need to operate. You're not going to have the pollinators you need to actually create the product that you need. And what that means is if you're producing $2 billion worth of revenue there today, we can forecast ahead and say 20% of that is going to be affected in the next 3 to 5 years. And that means we can finally start to quantify that to the CFO, which will then catalyze action and change.
Yes, it's such a valuable point. Using this information to really talk the language of decision makers and having that really hardcore backing evidence so that they can have confidence in the data. So now, Zain, moving to Hub 71. So there's a lot happening in this space. You've got a lot of new startups coming your way. What type of systems, processes, checks and balances do you put into a place to identify the right startup that you want to scale and amplify?
So I think this, just to take a step back from that question, I think this panel and stage is a perfect example of where Hub 71 comes into play. We aggregate corporates with scientists and startups, and we enable them to have that conversation, and that's kind of our role as an ecosystem player. We have launched the climate tech vertical alongside COP28 in tandem with the UAE net zero goals and the focus of the region into largely conservation and decarbonization, and that shift of focus coming to emerging markets in the global south. And as Hub 71, our role is to scout and source the best climate and nature solutions, and I think we have discussed this endlessly. Everyone talks about climate. Nature is the other side of the coin. It's the invisible infrastructure that ties everything together. And with that, there was also the rise of AI that happened in the past couple of years, and our role is to understand what are the global, regional, and local trends and climatic, let's say, issues that are happening, and what solutions are we doing to source. So we work with the best-in-class funds, corporates, and government players, and build a strategy to source companies that, for example, look at the different angles of both conservation and decarbonization. So as Hub 71, we have 4 main areas of focus. We have nature and climate resilience, energy transition, the future of infrastructure, and the circular economy. And under that, horizontally, AI comes as an application that is either enabling or is driven by AI, right? So whether it's a solution such as Vian's that is mostly SaaS driven and looks at analytics of different financial institutions' assets and aggregates that into financial data that is then relayed onto financial CFOs and decision makers, or if it is looking at supply chain company that has a hardware component that is enabled by AI that makes the processes more efficient. So I think there is something about AI that, Vian, I'd love to hear also bounce this off between both speakers, that needs to be a little bit demystified, because it's seen as its own thing, like AI, the future of AI, whereas AI is the back end and is a network, is the new internet that basically everything is going to be involved with, right? So whether it's going to be infrastructure plays or looking at farmers and locating different geolocations of where arid or where land is to be kind of farmed for certain things, AI will be at the back end of that, I think, no matter what, in the next 3 to 5 years. So I think it's quite interesting to see how we can horizontally integrate AI and start looking at it as its own space, but also how it infiltrates every single space that we are talking about. And that's what we're looking at Hub 71 in terms of the solutions. So it's tech-enabled solutions, whether it's in the deep tech, software, hardware space. What pertains to solving an issue in these 4 buckets that we've identified to be the most important buckets to nature and climate resilient future.
Yeah, amazing. It's absolutely the case that AI is going to be streamlined into every single part of our society for the betterment of society and environment. So just to recap for those who have now come through, we have M42 Dr. Wael, who's highlighted the importance of AI in understanding natural systems and using predictive modelling to assess how that changes over time. We have Dr. Zain from Habitat Alpha, who's able to translate this information, natural system information, ecosystem health, into financial terms. And we have Zain from Hub 71, who is enabling pilots and startups that are suitable and credible to scale. Now let's move into the verifying aspects. So there's a lot of uncertainty over there. There's a lot of skepticism in terms of understanding really Well, as Zain mentioned, you know, what is AI? How does it relate to climate and nature? Can it be trusted? Can we use it to make informed decisions? So, Dr. Wael, in the work you do within M42, you often do it in partnerships. So, for example, research with OceanX and the Environment Agency Abu Dhabi, all the way through to the work you do with other government entities on food systems. What steps and measures do you take to really validate the findings so that these decision makers, government entities, etc., can use the information to inform policy and make informed decisions?
So thank you very much, Amy. A lot of people who heard me talk before, I'm a big fan of Oscar Wilde. And there's a very particular essay. Someone's laughing at the back because he's probably heard me say this before. It's called The Soul of Man Under Socialism, whereby he depicts and speaks about the introduction of tractors in the 18th century and how they should facilitate more time for leisure for humanity. And I think that's probably the end point of what we're all trying to do is utilize tools that give us more leisure. But to do that, we have to validate. And the word validate in itself means to ensure that it's doing what it's meant to be doing, and that the data that we have is accurate, is correct, is reflective, and is actionable. There's a lot of data being generated. There's the classic statement that everyone says, garbage in, garbage out. But we don't think garbage in, garbage out. We think if garbage in, if we can clean it up and utilize it and recycle it, even as data, just like we would with energy, we'd love to be able to do that. And that's a lot of the work that we do. A lot of the work we do is actually looking at data, and before we move to machine learning and algorithms, we actually do significant amounts of data cleaning using standard statistical models, human beings, looking at these tables one by one, ensuring that it's reflective and accurate and makes sense. And making sense is very important because humans are storytellers. So what's important here is we look at the data, we ensure that the story matches with the expectation, tie it up together, and then we add in this layer of artificial intelligence or machine learning or modeling or Bayesian statistics or whatever people say to increase the accuracy of fortune telling. It's like the Chinese cookies is what we're trying to do, is what's going to happen in the future. And there's always a margin of error. So it's very important for us to describe to these stakeholders the margin of error, the probability, the likelihood. If I knew the future, I wouldn't, today I don't know what's happening with the stock market, so I'd be putting some money on or off Bitcoin. But what we're trying to do is a little bit more reflective, utilizing this data sets and observing what happens in the future and retraining our models more to reduce this gap or the inaccuracies as in when we go. We've worked with quite a few entities, including OceanX, trying to fingerprint the oceans to try and see what it is today, and later on, hopefully with the tools that we have, subtract what has gone and what is available or what changes. We work very closely with Abu Dhabi Quality and Conformity Council to ensure the safety of the foods, and actually we have a platform at the moment here that actually predicts the likelihood of food tested failing before it comes or importation based on previous results that we have. There's, with our colleagues from Inception, I think you mentioned the pollinators. We actually have a pollinator intelligence solution unit. I think Nancy over there is nodding her head because she worked on it a lot. Trying to see how pollinators move and how that has a downstream effect also in economics with the trees, the pollens, the grass, the honey, and all the rest of that. So there's a lot of what we do that is dependent in human beings, first and foremost, who understand the story. It's really important to say that we need humans who can make sense of the data and say, well, maybe the computer's wrong.
Really important point. It's not necessarily that the AI and the robots will take over the world. There's always super important to have that human checks and balances along the way. So again, moving to Dr. Vian, the discussion of nature and finance to the corporate world, to the CFOs, to the CEOs is all pretty new. And I'm sure over the time since you've created this amazing organisation, you've had the skeptics, you've had the critics, and you've had to really work hard to make sure the back end can be verified and is accurate. So in preparation for this panel, I did some research into your platform, and I think you've got something like 8.5 million assets, 28 geospatial layers on the solution. So what checks and balances have you put in place to make sure what the outputs that are coming out, and also when you look under the hood, there's some humans as well as AI checking the findings?
Yeah, 100%, Amy. And all those layers combined and the data sets combined mean that actually we're producing something like 300 million data points every month, which we give to our clients. And you're quite right. The people that we work with are responsible for a collective $25 trillion worth of money. And if you're on the hook for managing risk against trillions of dollars within a large financial institution, which is trying to measure its exposure to risk because it needs to make sure that, for example, if it's giving a loan, that creditor is going to pay it back. If some natural event happens which impacts its lending or its exposure, then it needs to have enough capital reserves to be able to pay out. So what we're starting to see now is absolutely this integration of this sort of data started in climate, so one dimension, and now has expanded to natural world risk, multi-dimensional risk, whether that is biodiversity loss, whether that's ecosystem richness, species richness, water. These are all additional dimensions that have now come into the risk picture. So yes, this data has to be validated and verified. And we again use scientific layers and satellite imagery to do the geospatial part. But what I always say and have said from the beginning, which is so interesting, is that sometimes understanding a challenge like natural world risk is actually not about natural world risk. It's about where are the significant operations of the 11,500 largest companies in the world, which make up basically 99% of the stock market, global stock markets. That question alone is actually very difficult to answer. How do we find out this information? And that's where AI has helped us so much. So what we do when we're looking for asset locations is we have 4 models. We run the queries through each of the 4 models. If at the other end of that process there's a high match, then we think that 99% sort of sure that this is actually definitely a location that belongs to this company. If not, it has to go back, human verification, and go through the process again. Similarly with supply chains, unbelievably complex. If you're thinking about 12,000 companies, if you think about who's supplying them, sometimes they will have thousands of tier 1 suppliers. So the suppliers that supply them, where are they located? And who are the suppliers who supply the tier 1 suppliers? So you end up with incredibly complex relationships, all of which AI can help us with, and that's nothing to do with nature. That's just where our companies. So it's these sorts of solutions that we can now start to crack. Everything we do has to be completely transparent, right down to the last input. Otherwise, the financial institutions won't use it. So it's been a real test for us.
Yeah, it's a test for all corporates. I know I've got some members of my team here today, and we're trying to start to map our value chain. So it's hugely complex, and that's very much where we're looking at integrating AI into this discussion. So we have these complex systems, natural systems, and we've got solutions coming through saying we can more accurately predict things like major weather events. So when floods are going to be coming in, we can more accurately pinpoint when and where these events are going to take place. We've got other solutions that are saying we can have a greater understanding on biodiversity, bee biodiversity, for example. So Zain, my question to you within Hub 71, with I think 3,000 applications coming through to Hub 71 last year, and I think there was just 46 that were selected, 26 of those I think AI solutions, but that's a really tough job to really screen those to make sure you're giving those pilots the opportunity to become products in the market, what steps and process and criteria do you use to really screen those 3,000 applications, particularly in the climate nature space?
So we have a very diligent process in selecting the companies that are admitted to our ecosystem and to our program. So within our ecosystem, we're partnered with over 40 capital partners, over 50 corporate partners, and I would say almost every government agency in the UAE. And through that network, what we do is we build a very vigorous selection process that is compiled from a very subject matter expert selection committee. And it differs for each vertical. So we have digital assets, climate, AI, and we're launching more sector-specific and focused sub-ecosystems, if you will, and climate being one of them. What we do is we work with our government partners, so EAD, Ministry of Climate Change and Environment, Ministry of Energy, our corporate partners, so the sustainability counterparts. We work with scientists, we work with institutions, universities, and we basically build a selection committee that screens a lot of these technologies based on what, climate is very cross-cutting, and that's why we have these 4 buckets. So someone that is an expert in circular economy is not going to be able to screen a, material science infrastructure product. So we're building as we go, but I think just to reflect back on what Dr. Wael, Dr. Vian said earlier, which is a very, to put it in one way, important part of the innovation story. Data is imperfect, and AI is very dependent on human beings. And I think when you look at an innovation or technology, there's 2 very important counterparts. There's the tech, and then there's the entrepreneur and the human. And the entrepreneur, and the reason that startups have, a very certain way of operating, growing, and failure is a big part of them, right? So our role is not to ensure that these companies are we cannot guarantee that any company that comes into our ecosystem is going to succeed, get a commercial opportunity, get a pilot with G42, with ADNOC. Our role is to identify the talent, so that the entrepreneurs, the humans behind the ideas, holistically looking at their teams, their journeys, who they are as people, what ideas they bring to the table. So that already becomes part of the validation. And then the entrepreneurship space is all about trial and error, it's about experimentation, it's about building and failure. We look at the early stage, so there's a seed to Series A. So that's a very interesting sweet spot. Actually, statistically, 90% of companies at that stage, I think even a little bit more at this point in 2025, fail, right? So it's not a question of making sure we try our best to enable the best talent and entrepreneurs and put them in the right situation to build, to pivot, to pitch, and that is as much as we can do as an ecosystem. But then it's up to the founder, their grit, their way of navigating the ecosystem, and their way of capturing opportunity and pitching their product and actually finding their product market fit in the market. So just to kind of summarize, I think the entrepreneur and the founder, and looking at teams, and us not being a venture capital of doing due diligence and just looking at numbers, nor scientists, our role is to bring the right people into the room to screen these companies, see their product market fit for us based on our partners. So our selection committee is a lot of off-takers and corporate partners that look at this, and they validate and they say, like, yes, this would be an interesting technology that we could adopt. We'd be happy to guide this startup throughout their journey. So it is a very integrative approach that looks at a very diligent way of validating at a high level the product market fit and the founder behind these ideas.
Yeah, I really like that idea of, you've got to learn from your failures. So you can't just give up. And you've got to amplify those wins. So I think Nature Alpha here is a good testament of that. So it's great to have you here on the panel now.
To emphasize on the failure piece very quickly, like failure does not mean there's different scales to failure, right? Failure can be trying something new or a new feature or a new product and it's not working out or failing, and then having the agility to say, okay, we're going to pivot. So it doesn't have to be like huge like dramatic failures, but my point being is that there's a lot of experimentation and trial and error that is inherent to the entrepreneurship and startup space, and how founders navigate that is extremely important to their success.
Absolutely, and being resilient to that. So now let's move on to the white elephant in the room. We are talking about climate and nature and AI. And we know, it's no hidden secret, that AI is a huge consumer of energy. So we are in a climate tech nexus. How do we scale these solutions whilst not exacerbating these impact on climate? Within G42, we shine a light on this relationship. So I'm sure you've heard some of the other panels, and you've gone to the CASNA stand today, and you can see that we're deploying green data centres. So data centres that are designed with energy efficiency measures inherent into the build and operation, through LEED certification, for example. We're increasingly tapping into renewable energy, so solar at our Mazda facility is a good example of that. We're also actively developing our carbon inventory. So having a strong understanding over the G42 Scope 1, Scope 2 and future Scope 3 emissions will allow us to develop a decarbonisation plan that aligns to our business strategy. So again, Zain, back to you. Back to you again. Hub 71, are you seeing a trend or change in the startups that are coming through Hub 71 where we're recognising this huge demand for energy that these models need? And what trends are you seeing in terms of them solving that energy demand?
The implications of AI and data centers is definitely something that we have in the horizon, and I believe that every solution, opportunity, has a other side to it, which is a problem, right? And that problem becomes a new opportunity to be solved. So from our end, we see everything, the whole supply chain of everything from the chip to the actual infrastructure of the data centers being potential solutions for the climate and climate nexus. So we are actively seeking, because this ties into the national conversation about the UAE being the capital of AI and building all of these data centers, and our role in that is to see what are those implications and how can we start shipping in different solutions. And I think most of that is seeking out in the infrastructure space. So looking at green infrastructure and green energy, and then it ties in back again to the energy transition, energy solutions for this nexus of the data center. So there's no specific answer in a box, but we're definitely integrating that into the scouting of the founders and solutions that we're in the next cohorts that we're having.
It's a very good point. Yes, the UAE's strong commitment to achieve net zero by 2050, and it's great that corporate groups, NGOs, are really looking at how, through the management of their suppliers and their customers, are integrating those considerations into the engagement. Let's go to you, Dr. Wael. So in terms of your amazing career at M42, you've achieved some amazing things, and I'm sure you've seen some challenges along the way. So within your work at M42 in the Environmental Sciences Division, what have you learnt from those challenges, and what have been the source of the challenge?
So a lot of the challenges are actually due to the pace of development. The pace over the last 6 or 7 years has been relentless. And in a way, it's great, but sometimes when you're running for too long, a very long marathon, you get tired towards the end. Over the last 5 years, our colleagues in the Omics lab have managed to sequence more than 850,000 genomes. We've managed to sequence and assemble quite a lot of the native plants here. We got involved with fingerprinting the oceans. We've established probably the world's largest wastewater surveillance system. We've developed artificial intelligence and data collection tools with that, which we're launching here in GITEX. We've worked with other colleagues to look at pollinators, and all of that in the span of 5 years. So you have to learn, and learn very quick. Some of us come from a completely different field and had to work with a completely diverse set of humans who have what I call 3 screens with a lot of stuff that I do not understand, yet we have to tell and say the narrative together for the better of humanity. But more importantly is we understand very well we are also racing against time. There are a lot of challenges involving the environment that are leading to a lot of geopolitical crises. They're leading to a lot of human migration. They're leading to a lot of animal migration, and the world is changing faster than we are able to answer these challenges. So I think first and foremost is getting a unified understanding of priorities and prioritization, and that actually one thing affects the other, would be the most difficult challenge that we've had over the last couple of years.
Yes, it is. The pace of change, both in terms of our environmental change, population change, and how unprecedented the growth in AI has been, for the good and the bad. So for the betterment of humanity and society, but then also recognising that climate tech nexus discussion. Dr. Vian, over to you. So you've done a phenomenal job over the last couple of years founding Nature Alpha. So from going from a pilot to an enterprise-grade quality product would have seen significant challenges along the way. It's not only a new product, but it's also a new topic. Again, we're trying to translate natural systems risks and opportunities into corporate language that the CFOs and investors will understand. So please tell us, how did you learn? What challenges did you face, and how did you overcome them?
It actually, I'm reflecting back on my esteemed panelists' thoughts. If we are to come up with solutions together, we have to be incredible translators. So this is not going to work unless policymakers understand what the finance industry needs to understand and how they think, and then how science feeds into informing all of us with regard to what direction we need to go in. As you said, Dr. Wael, we know what's coming, and we know that we have to respond to it. Governments know we have to respond to it because they can't cope with the pace of change and the scale of change, and the finance industry is under pressure to finance all of this, right? So everyone's on the hook. But it has taken hours, thousands of hours, I always say, of capacity building to explain how this works. And in 2020, this was just a thought. The fact that nature could be a consideration, natural world risk could be a consideration in financial decision making, was a thought. But because of the pressure on governments and the fact that they're going to have to finance a lot of the change that we're seeing, they then put pressure on the finance industry, who had to start to think about what they were doing. And we just had to frame that in financial terms, which is part of why adoption has been so significant. I think what I'd also leave you all with is something that really stunned me when we first built our product. What you're able to do, we provide data, yes, data by the pound, which financial organizations love. They want zeros and ones, they want numbers, they want figures. But alongside that, we produce a thing called the Geoverse, which is a platform that enables you to visualize where company locations are in relation to all of these geospatial factors. And the very first time I saw the Geoverse and we looked up a mining company, you start to zoom in on the change over time in forest cover, in key biodiversity areas, and how they've grown or shrunk. And it was astounding to see how much cover over the last 10 years has just been pushed back, and to see these mines just growing and growing and growing. Just that visual imagery was so unbelievably powerful that for us, we thought, my God, we've just got to keep on going, because we had no idea it looked like that. And now what that means is, if you are an investor investing in a company, or you're a company looking at operation, you can see the mangrove that is providing the flood protection next to your operation. You can see it degrading, and you know, okay, I need to invest in that because over the long term it's going to protect my operations. I can see that the forest here is being pushed back. Actually, we need to reforest there if we're going to keep this in some sort of resilient state. So that profoundly powerful visual imagery has been very, very catalytic.
And speaks directly to the decision makers. So if they can visually see this is what's changing and this is how it's going to impact on operations under various scenarios, it's a very powerful tool to drive the discussion.
There's a tool that our head of AI developed where you can then start to imagine and visualize what's going to happen in the future. It's a little, it kind of builds it up in a spiral, and you start to see the future state of this environment. And you just can't not see that the invisible has now become visible.
Perfect segue. I know we're getting, I think we've probably passed the half-hour mark. Sorry, Ahmed. So let's go, and I'd love for each of our panelists just to provide 1 or 2 sentences that the audience can really take away from this panel discussion. So Zain, over to you first.
I mean, a lot of 3 different kind of pillars from different perspectives, but I think just to echo what Vian mentioned earlier about translating, being able to translate the problem, the issue, whether that's like nature or climate degradation, to the different stakeholders. So whether that's through the arm of innovation or science or entrepreneurship, I think the communication of the issue is part of the solution. I think getting different stakeholders in the room, that's what we've been trying to do as ecosystem enablers, and it has done a lot, putting people on a table and culminating that into a policy brief and pitching it to a government agency has actually, it's the small footprints that lead to like larger change. So I think working towards making the invisible visible by partnership and collaboration, and also seeing the human side of each technological side, so the human side of AI, and understanding that things will be imperfect and whatever we will build will be imperfect. It's the best to do the best that we can.
Over to you, Dr. Wael.
The only word I'd leave the audience with is probably uncertainty, and how do we manage uncertainty, and what are the tools that we have available. We've got a new tool called artificial intelligence that is meant to help us narrow and reduce our level of uncertainty, whether that's for the weather, whether that's for food supplies or tourism. It's yet another tool in our arsenal that we should be using, leveraging, learning, and maybe moving forward from soon. But that uncertainty is what we need to control.
Thank you, Dr. Wael. Over to you, Dr. Vian.
I think I'd just invite us all to bring it back to our own roles in this and what our legacy will be. And I think it's a quote that's actually misattributed to Gandhi, which is, be the change you want to see in the world. And it all starts with a person, an individual. We have all the tools. We have all the tools we need. And so it's up to us to be that change.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much, audience, for coming. It's been a pleasure to have you here on a Friday. We're learning everything about turning the invisible into visible, translating ecosystem health into a language that CFOs understand. Thank you so much.